The Islanders are surging, the Devils and Rangers struggling. Welcome to New York Centric, a product of the NHL Wraparound podcast. Vic Morren along with Neil Smith. And Mr. Smith, you have brought a special guest along today to help break this all down.
Yes, one of my Islander friends, a longtime New York Islander, and now doing a terrific job on MSG Network, along with Butch Goring and Brendan Burke and Shannon Hogan, and bringing us Islander games from the UBS Arena and from the road. And then last night, Thomas Hickey was at the Prudential Center for the New Jersey Devils and the Vancouver Canucks. Thanks for doing this, Thomas. It's great to have you.
My pleasure, guys. Love, as you know, Neil, we've talked many times before games. Love chopping it up and talking hockey, specifically the New York teams. And I mean, what a time it is right now. Different storylines every single place, but a lot of stress in each community. So it's a fun time of the year always.
Did you feel a little bit ill at ease last night being in the Devils arena without the Islanders being there?
Completely. Yeah, I was, it was a weird one. So doing the Amazon Prime, we do a Monday night game and it's a Canadian broadcast. And last night, one of my broadcast partners is Jody Shelley, who is the color analyst for the Columbus Blue Jackets. So for both of us, we're like, okay, the team that we cover on the regular is in their most important game of the year. We're playing each other, and here we are, I don't know, we'll call it 40 miles away in Newark, watching the Devils and the Canucks play a Western Conference team. So it definitely felt strange, but you're bound to get those throughout the season. But we were joking off air, keeping our eyes on the score and until it finally ended. So it was definitely strange. And then did my homework on the way home, and this morning got caught up on it. So it was weird missing out on it for sure. But it was a heck of a game. Sort of a similar thing over in Jersey, 4-3 shootout, crazy wild game with a great finish. And
you're going to have a great advantage tomorrow night doing the game because you've done some pre-scouting now on the Vancouver Canucks. So tomorrow night you won't need to do as much homework tomorrow during the day and leading up to the game tomorrow night. You'll know both teams like the back of your hand.
Yeah, that's the huge advantage of, having two different schedules. And I often, learn from Brendan Burke, who's obviously the voice of the Islanders, but does all the TNT games. And certainly you need to know your stuff. And especially on a national broadcast, the importance of knowing both angles equally as well. And Brendan, oftentimes, he might be watching Minnesota versus Detroit, and you're like, okay, well, I haven't seen those teams in 6 weeks or something, and then you get caught up and you get familiar. So it's such an advantage for me when the schedule does line up that you see a team that you're going to cover again in just a couple of days. And especially Vancouver right now, I mean, there's about 4 or 5 guys up from the American Hockey League that you got to get familiar with their background story. So it's almost like a pop quiz with the same questions that are going to be on the real test. It helps out big time. So I love when I get those popping up on my schedule.
Just to talk about the Canucks for just a second, since you're going to see them tomorrow night, and Vic and I are both going to be watching that game too tomorrow night, along with you, by the way, at UBS Arena. They got some real problems right now, right? With Pettersson being out of the lineup and gone home, and now Demko finally got back into the lineup and played his game last night. What's up with them?
Well, they're battling, and I'm impressed. I mean, Rick Tocchet's fingerprints are on that group, and for as much noise and controversy with JT Miller and Pettersson throughout the entire year, you go into last night in a game where they were 5 points out of a playoff spot, and your number one center is Pius Suter. And with all respect to him, I mean, he's been versatile. He's got over 20 goals now. He played a great hockey game, but you're probably starting a season thinking he's playing somewhere in your bottom 6. Maybe he's your third line center when you have to elevate him. So they just did it by committee. And for them to get Demko back, he hadn't played since February 8th. And we're talking about a guy that was a Vezina finalist and is a great goaltender, but he can't stay healthy. And there's so many bad storylines, but I think they blocked it out. And I give their coach a ton of credit for having that message and that focus. It's sort of like Calgary, where they're right now just outmanned. They don't have firepower. They need to find a way to score some goals. And they scored a late one last night. And this is second time in a couple weeks that they've found a way to come back in the last minute of a hockey game and get it to overtime. And the only way that they're doing things right now, quite honestly, is Quinn Hughes. There's no player in the NHL that is more important to their team than him. He played over 30 minutes. He was easily the best player on the ice and single-handedly created the last opportunity on his own. He's on a different playing field than anyone in the NHL right now, just with the importance that he has to their team. There's certain players that I consider myself and all of us as hockey fans lucky that we get to see. And for me to get to see him back to back, something truly remarkable. I can't wait to see him again tomorrow.
And speaking of, you just mentioned Calgary. I got to ask you, did you grow up a Flames fan?
Huge Flames fan. Massive. I was in grade 9 when the Flames went to the Cup final in 2004. Yeah, really formative memories. Go to Flames games all the time. Jerome McGinley was my favorite player. It was neat later on getting to play against him, but grew up a huge Flames fan and got to see a ton of hockey because we'd always, go to about 8 or 9 games a year, and that's what helped grow the love of the game for me.
And who was a defenseman that you most tried to pattern yourself after, if there was one?
Back then, I don't think I was totally thinking like that, but I mean, there's guys that stand out. I mean, Robin Regeer was a great Flame from when I was growing up. I'm absolutely the opposite of Robin Regeer, just because he's a big, huge guy that played a different style of game. Derek Morris, I liked watching him. Good offensive guy, but it was more the guys they had up front that I was attracted to than on the back end. But a lot of good players went through there, and especially that run that they had in 2004 was a special one.
And you didn't have the Mike Commodore haircut, so.
I didn't know, and then later getting to meet Mike Commodore, and I know him a little bit now, so that was strange, that miracle run that they went on. Yeah. And he was such a big part of that.
We're going to dive into the 3 New York area teams in just a second, but first, we always start the show off with a little bit of trivia, and the trivia happens to center around Thomas Hickey. So, question to our listeners. In the 2016 Stanley Cup playoffs, Thomas Hickey was involved in the scoring in 2 of the 3 overtime goals scored by the Islanders. 2-part question. Who did he score his overtime goal against? And whose did he assist on? And we will have the answer at the end of our show. So go to your research materials, put on your thinking caps, and we'll be back a little bit later with the answer. Let's start off with the Islanders. 2-0-2 for the week, but they leave points on the table. Comeback win in Pittsburgh, a 4-3 overtime win against Montreal, but the Canadiens come back from 3-1 to force that overtime. So that's a point that the Canadiens got that they probably should not have. And then on Saturday and Monday, respectively, 2 late lost leads. Kyle McLean put the Islanders ahead on Saturday against Calgary, scoring with 2:51 left, but just 29 seconds later, Jonathan Huberdeau ties it on a deflection, and then Nazem Kadri wins that game in overtime. And then Monday against Columbus, the Isles had leads of 2-0 and 3-2. Kirill Marchenko ties that game with 7:04 left in regulation, and then go on to win the game in a shootout. So, Thomas, this has been somewhat of an issue all year for the Islanders. I mean, it was very prevalent the first 2 months of the season, kind of died down. But now it's rearing its ugly head again, and then they let 2 points get away in their last 2 games and also give Montreal a point, which, by the way, is the difference between the 2 clubs in the standings as of Tuesday morning.
Yeah, and it leaves a really bad taste in the mouth for fans. And Neil, you're at the games when you win in overtime, the elation that everyone feels, and it's a great win. And then sometimes it's decided by a shootout, and you walk away feeling like it's the end of the world, and you got screwed over. You lost something big that you already had. It's just crazy how the emotions can swing from that one point. And sometimes when it's decided in a shootout, I mean, you're flipping a coin. But I would say, Vic, that these are different from the start of the year to what's going on right now. At the start of the year, it was a train wreck. You had to close your eyes and hope that you'd get through without hearing the whistle blow and hearing the other team celebrate, because it was a group that was just way too weighed down with the lead, and it was a burden every time they had it, and every time they would go up 3-1, you could just feel something inside the building throughout the course of a year. And I remember at that time saying, well, the Islanders are going to have to find a way to make those points back at some point, because you've given away too many, whether they lost it in regulation or ended up losing the extra point in the extra frame or shootout. Those all add up. And then it was just last week that it came back from 2-0 to win in regulation against Florida, came back from 2-0 to win in regulation in Pittsburgh, both third period wins. And at that point I said, okay, well, they're chipping away at some of those points that they gave away before. They're earning them back. The leads that they've given up recently, in my mind, haven't been quite, we're petrified to have a lead and we just can't hold on and we don't know how to win. They've been different. You know, the one in Montreal, you've got a veteran guy that turns the puck over at the offensive blue line, a clear-cut breakaway. Like, that's a little bit different than a group that couldn't get out of their own end and it looked like no one wanted the puck. I just got caught up on last night, but they were a better team for 2 periods so far from what I'm watching, and Columbus poured it on. It looked a little bit more like earlier on in the season. It will continue to rear its head, but I do think, just from watching, I think the group has a different collective mindset of when they have that lead, that they're not scared of that lead. They didn't have that earlier in the year. I think that was a huge issue. But with respect to what you're saying, I mean, we're talking about points that you let slip away and other teams come away with. Well, some massive ones when you look at the Calgary game and you look at last night and Montreal getting to pick up a point. It's a very long season. There's no doubt this team has struggled to have the upper hand, but I'm sure it's not going to be the last time that you give up a lead or score a last-minute goal to stay in a game. And we just realize how important these extra overtime points and shootout points are.
Last night also had a little bit of controversy baked into it. One goal by Anders Lee at the end of the second period, which was challenged by Columbus, and the goal was upheld, which actually looked like goalie interference. And then Kyle Palmieri, in the final 9 seconds of regulation, with what appeared to be perhaps the game-winning goal. And Toronto got involved and said the goal did not count, since that was the initial indication by the referee. Patrick Waugh, after the game, said if Toronto is afraid to overturn calls made by their referee, we don't need Toronto. So I think the upshot here, and Neil, you can jump in first on this, is you had 2 goals. It wound up coming out even Steven, because the Lee goal probably shouldn't have counted, and the Palmieri goal probably should have.
From my perspective, I think the Islanders should have won that game. They outplayed Columbus badly in the first period. They allowed Columbus to come back at them again in the second and then the third. I would add to, Vic, what you said, and for Thomas to tell us his feelings, having been around the team both at home and on the road. It's a funny group because they don't have 2 excellent players. They don't have Brock Nelson now. He's in Colorado. And they haven't had Barzell for quite a long time now with his knee injury. But they seem like a more cohesive group now than they did when they had them. Like they seem like the type of group that's saying, like, okay, it's just us against the world, so let's get together and try to get this done, even though we don't have these guys that could do so much for us. Like, I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. I totally agree, and I love it. And I think that's sort of the mentality that the Islanders have had for, even the years that they went to the conference finals. Like, there's sort of a bonus when you feel people count you out or don't think you are skilled enough or have the people to get the job done, and you do. But I agree. I think everyone's found a role on the team, and it's slotted guys to maybe be in a position where they have to overachieve because someone else is out, and guys are up for that task. I think it makes a difference that you've got a fourth line now that I think you lacked for the first 50 games of the season. There was no fourth line identity, and that's not because guys like Kyle McLean weren't playing as well, but finally with McLean and Gatcomb and Siplikov, I mean, they're making as many plays as anyone, but they have an identity to them every time they go out, and it's sort of interchangeable with that third line with Zizekas and Engvall, who's playing great. Now you're at the point where both of those lines are playing about 12 minutes and giving you great stuff and many shifts, and you're getting the production of guys that are just scratching and clawing and trying to find it from Lee and Palmieri, and Horvat stepped up, and Holmstrom looks like a top six guy right now. So you've got all these pieces that are coming together in a group on the back end that looks way different from the start of the year. They move the puck way better. There's more poise. So I agree with you, Neil. It's a group that has come together despite having every reason to not be a group that's able to execute because they lack those top guys. So it's been fun to watch, and I appreciate watching this hockey more than I did at the beginning of the year because it looks like a team. It's enjoyable to watch right now. Win or lose, get the result. You don't get the result, call goes your way. It's something that's enjoyable, and it looks like a cohesive group. And to that call, I agree. I'd be so upset if I'm Palmieri, if I'm the New York Islanders. It's so gray. It's tough to comment on goaltender stuff. When the goaltender himself makes a shove at a player outside of the crease, come on. I mean, you're just inviting every other goaltender to do that now. And it's sort of one of these precedent things, like a law case, but it seems precedent doesn't really stay and set the tone for everyone else because there's so many instances and there's so many different gray areas. And, I think the biggest issue on the play is the emphatic no goal call for goalie interference. I mean, we've said it all the time I think the three of us know how difficult the job is as an official for a linesman or a referee. We often say, well, why didn't the linesman just let it go? And then you can review it later if it was offside because the video guys aren't going to miss that. Well, you could say the same thing for goaltender interference. I don't know if you need an emphatic no-goal call, and then you have to go and prove without a shred of doubt that it wasn't goaltender interference on the replay. I would prefer it the other way around. With Columbus goes, you know what, let's take a look at that. There's 8 seconds left in the game. We've got no other option than to challenge this. We have to, so we will. And then you can decide with a different lens on, not one of prove that there was absolutely no goaltender interference. It would be prove that there was. And it's a different argument and maybe a different outcome.
And I want to get back to what you said earlier, too, about the fans. And I've said this my whole career. If you want to make your fans happy, both in a season macro form and in a micro individual game form, start off behind and end up winning. And then everybody goes home thrilled. And it's the same in a regular season. Start off and give them the expectation that you're shitty and then end up in the playoffs. And everybody's thrilled because they got more than what they expected. And it's that way individual games too. The worst way to be with the fans is to start off and everybody thinks, oh, we're going to have a great night tonight. We're up 3-0. And then slowly let it slip away and you lose and they go out. They're all pissed off when they go out. Same thing with the season. Start off the season, you're great guns, you're this, you're that. By the end of the season, oh my God, we're going to miss the playoffs. It's like what goes on in Pittsburgh every year now because everybody thinks somehow because they got Sidney and Malkin and Carlson and Letang that they're got a shot at the cup. Of course, we all know that they're going to not even make the playoffs. So it's the ultimate tease. And I think that's what you were speaking about before.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, after a win or a loss, I'll be walking up the stairs to get from in between the benches to the set. And with an overtime or shootout win, no matter whether there was a comeback involved, whatever it was, this is great. Guys are going to make the playoffs. And on a loss, and we're talking about like just a shootout goal might decide it. On a loss, people are saying, we got to tear this thing down. This is a joke. And I get it. I mean, that's why we love going to games. That's why fans are important because the emotion that you carry home with you is so dependent on one single play. That's what makes the sport great. But yeah, it just goes to show how our opinions and our feelings can change so much just based off of one little moment rather than a full game. But that's just the way it is.
The Islanders will wrap up their 4-game homestand on Wednesday against the Vancouver Canucks. And then they head for a couple of tough games over the weekend on the road, Saturday at Tampa and Sunday at Carolina. Let's move on to the New Jersey Devils. 0-2-1 for the week. As we repeat often, they are locked into that third spot in the Metropolitan Division, not statistically, but they're not going higher, they're not going lower. They suffered a 5-3 loss last Tuesday to the Calgary Flames. Calgary scoring 4 goals in the third, a team that doesn't score a lot, and Devils give up what amounted to be an offensive explosion by the Flames. On Saturday, they drop a 3-2 decision to the Ottawa Senators. Nico Hischier hitting the 30-goal mark. He's one off of his career high. Jesper Bratt with his 61st assist of the season. Linus Ullmark for the Senators making 25 saves, 14 of those coming in the third period. And then the game that Thomas was at on Monday, 4-3 shootout loss. Game is tied in the final minute of regulation by Pius Suter with 36 seconds left. No Pettersson, no Hoglander. And Devils, Thomas, you've seen this. And for a team that is just trying to figure out their game, no Jack Hughes heading into the playoffs. What are you seeing stylistically about them that is going to be most important for them to have any sort of playoff success without their number one star?
I didn't dislike the way that they played. Actually, pretty structured. There's been stretches this year where defensively they played so good that the other team's putting up like 20 shots. I think they set a record right around November, December time that I think it was like 8 games in a row their opponent had less than 20 shots, and it sort of looked like that last night. And all the great chances were created by Hughes and great individual plays, but outside of that, they played with a good amount of structure. They're finding ways to lose right now. And speaking with a couple of their players after the game, that's sort of it. They hang in there. They play a pretty good hockey game, and you win a face-off, not be able to get it out, and the other team scores with their goalie pulled. It's that sort of thing. And just a sidebar note, I mean, this is the time of the year. I said it last year and the year before. Watch how many goals are scored directly off of a face-off play, off of a win. I mean, you look at Columbus's goal last night, Marchenko to tie it up. Well, face-off win, a goal comes right off of it. Doesn't happen early on in the year, but in the third period, when March and April come and the playoffs are being decided, it always happens more than anything. And last night, same thing. Devils get one directly off of a face-off and then give one up in the third period right away directly off of a face-off play. It's happening all the time. But for the Devils, I think, a big part of the issue, and the vibe doesn't seem great around there, to be honest, checking in. They were I think that they've been in a comfortable position. I'm not saying they're playing comfortable, but I don't think it is an enviable position if you're a team outside of the playoff race. But when you're in there all season long, it's been like 3 months that you can look at this and say, well, the Devils are going to play Carolina in the first round. And we don't know who's going to have home ice, but they're certainly not catching Washington. And the rest of the Metro has been so bad that they don't need to really worry about playing 500 hockey for a stretch of 2 months because they're going to be in that same spot. And I think now they're looking in the rearview mirror, probably more than anyone league-wide. When you look at the Islanders and Columbus and the Rangers, no one's really talking about the Devils because it seems like you just want to get a wild card spot. But I feel like the Devils are looking back on, wow, we've really been in idle gear and those teams are gaining on us right now. And I think to me, that's what stands out is you've got that team looking behind them. Another team's going, well, we didn't even think it was a possibility to catch the Devils. But yeah, there's an identity crisis when you lose. I think there's a shock when you lose Hughes and Hamilton at the time that you think that you're going to bolster your lineup and be a true contender. And they've moved a lot of bodies in and out of that lineup. So it's not a great feeling in New Jersey right now. At the same time, they've shown that they've got this defensive structure at times that if they can get a consistent Markstrom, I think they'll be just fine. I don't know what it means for playoffs without your best players in the lineup. I don't really love that at all, but there's no doubt that they're not heading in a great direction right now. Instead, they're just trying to find their game. And it's been a long time that they've been trying to do that. It doesn't look like a lot of fun right now.
Thomas, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of something that you made clear without probably even knowing you made clear, to me at least. You look at the 8 teams that are going to be in the playoffs, and we don't know who the 8th one is in the East. But nobody would consider the 7th seed or the 8th seed in the East a true contender for the Stanley Cup. But the top 6, you sort of, other than the Devils, the other 5, sane minds could consider them all a Stanley Cup contender. I mean, even if we don't, in our own personal view, I think that the Capitals, the Carolina Hurricanes, certainly the Panthers, the Maple Leafs, and the Tampa Bay Lightning to some extent because of Vasilevsky and Kucherov and the rest of them, people could say that they've got as good a chance to win the Cup. The only team in the top 6 that I don't think anybody would say is a Stanley Cup contender is the Devils.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's fair. You could make arguments for everyone else. And a couple months ago, you could make an argument for the Devils too, because they've got a superstar in Hughes and an offensive attack with everyone healthy that could be scary. And Siegenthaler and Kovacevic were a really good shutdown pair. And then you've got Hamilton, Hughes, and you've got all these pieces. But without those guys, it's a different story. And they've given no one a reason to believe that they're a Cup threat right now. Look, things can change. They can come together and band together as a group. We've just been talking about how well the Islanders have done without their top guys. So I'm not selling them out, but I agree with you. Out of the top 6, they'd be 6th in line without question.
And maybe even behind Ottawa at this point. Because Ottawa, the one team that Toronto doesn't want to play, I can tell you for sure, in the first round is Ottawa.
Yeah, Ottawa's coming, and I enjoy watching them play, but they probably don't even feel like they're across that finish line either. There's a lot of hockey left to play, and they've been in that situation where they go hot and then they go cold. So they gotta keep their eyes both in front of them and behind them as well.
And Thomas, you being from Western Canada, me being from Toronto, and having a little bit more feel for this, the Senators and the Leafs is like the Islanders and the Rangers to a certain extent.
It is great. It's so good.
The Ottawa goes in and it's into the Scotiabank, and it's their biggest night of the year. They get to go in and play the hated Leafs, and they're these little guys from Ottawa. They're just there by themselves, and it's another game for the Leafs, right? But for Ottawa, it's everything. It's sort of the same as when we used to go to Nassau Coliseum. Or the Islanders came to the Garden, and the Islanders, it was a big night and everything for the Rangers. Okay, it's another game we got to play, and it was David and Goliath, and I think that's the way it is in that Ontario series, that it's David and Goliath with the Leafs and the Senators.
Yeah, it's all about how your fans feel, and I think as a player in management, you feed off of that. And yeah, absolutely. When we played for the Islanders, you play the Rangers. It's the biggest game of the year every single time. And Craig Berube has talked about that and the challenges of being in Toronto, not making excuses, but take away any rivalry that you might have. If you're coming into Toronto, you probably got anywhere between half a dozen and 10 guys from Ontario that it's a big personal game for them to be back home in front of their family. But then there's original 6 matchups that you have with Montreal and that you have with Boston that are huge rivalries. And then you throw in the Ottawa one, and it might just be another game for the Leafs, but for Ottawa and their fans, that's the Super Bowl. That's the biggest one. That's Islanders, Rangers. So it's tough, and some teams have more of them than others. It's great for the other team's fans, but it's tough. It's tough for you. It puts a target on your back.
And that's why I think the Leafs shudder at the thought of having to play the Senators in the
I think
first
Ottawa
round.
would crave it. I think they would invite it too.
It's all upside for the Senators, and it's all downside for the Leafs.
Yeah, and for the Leafs, I mean, it's not really upside against anyone because you've got so many tough storylines that have followed them. But at least with Tampa, they've overcome that, right? So maybe that's one that I don't know. I don't think they're going to be comfortable playing anyone in the first round. I don't think anyone should be because anyone can beat anyone on any given day, and especially the way the Atlantic lines up. if you're playing Florida, if you're playing Tampa, I mean, it's coin flip between all these teams.
Yeah.
And for the Maple Leafs, of course, carrying that 58-year gorilla on their back certainly doesn't help things. So as we wrap up the Devils, I think we saw the frustration on Jacob Markstrom smashing his stick over the crossbar after the game ended. But they probably a little tonic to get back on the rails. Starting this week, they have 4 games. Wednesday at Chicago. Then they head to Winnipeg on Friday, Saturday in Minnesota, and then return home next Monday for a return match against the Wild. Shift over to the Rangers. 1-2 this week. Kind of going through the motions from what Neil and I can see. And we discussed yesterday, Thomas, on NHL Wraparound, how really disengaged this club looks. They had 4 Canadian teams come in, and I'm going back to the beginning of last week where they lost to Edmonton, followed it up with a dreadful game and a 2-1 loss against Calgary, played better but still fell short against Toronto last Thursday, and then Saturday against the Canucks, who you saw on Monday. They get a 5-3 win, 2 goals by Johnny Brodzinski. The second one, the game winner with 4:13 left. It was JT Miller's first game against his former team. He had an empty net goal and an assist. The club was outshot 11-1 in the first and 39-12 overall. And as we've seen so often, Igor Shesterkin really had to bail them out for much of the night. And even though it's a win, and they're heading out on a 3-game Western swing, I don't think there's a lot of good feel in New York. The team certainly isn't playing for each other, and it doesn't look like they're playing for the coach or management either.
Yes, vibe's not good. A stunner like the Calgary one. I didn't see the game, but before I heard and people that went, they were just so surprised because Calgary got pumped the night before in Toronto. I did that game. They lost the Leafs 6-2, and it's a group that doesn't have a lot of firepower. So you know that they're a competitive team. They're gonna bring that. So you just take care of that, and your skill should probably do the best on a team that's on a back-to-back with going across the border and getting in late. And the Flames wanted the puck more than they did the entire night. Those are the things that I think at this time of the year, you win or lose, but when you look disengaged, when you need to be desperate and hungry, it raises alarm bells, and it's concerning. The same thing, I watched the game against Vancouver. They didn't deserve to win it. Good for them. They did. They found a way to win 5-3, but that's really concerning when the group looks disengaged at the most important time of the year. And the Western trip should tell you a lot about maybe what the fate of this group's going to be over the last 11 games here, because you sort of got to want it going out there. Like Anaheim, it doesn't come easy. There's obviously no easy games, but especially Anaheim now, and as good as LA is at home, you're going to have to dig in to win those two and get San Jose at the end of that on a back-to-back. So it's going to be tough, but it's sort of crazy to look at the group that was last year that won the President's Trophy. And I look through the lineup, and right now, I mean, you've got a bunch of guys that weren't even there last year, and they were able to sort of keep that group together if they wanted to. Othman's, prospect that's up. Brodzinski's given them great hockey all year, but not a guy that you had penciled in as counting on him to score. Parson and Berard, a prospect, Borgen on the back end, Soucy, Jones didn't play for them last year. The roster is just so different that it's hard to believe you've had that much turnover from a group that was so good. But I don't know where the disengagement comes from. One thing's for sure is you can rely on Igor Shesterkin to win you hockey games. It's a proven fact, but it's not a recipe that's going to put you much more than in a wild card conversation. So they got a ton of stuff to figure out.
Thomas, you played 456 NHL games for the Islanders, obviously, and you played a lot of games for Seattle Thunderbirds in a league that's a mini NHL. From a player's perspective, what causes the room to become disengaged and sort of go out like they're sleepwalking out onto the ice. And I've seen it with teams, but I'm not a player. I wasn't in the locker room. I was seeing it from up above. I've seen this happen with the Rangers from my own time there. I've seen it happen with the other teams. But from a player's perspective, in the room when the room is lost, don't you? I mean, and what causes that to happen, that malaise to come over the whole dressing room?
I think it's mental, emotional fatigue, but not in the moment. You don't just decide one day like, oh, I can't take the coach anymore. Or I can't take my line mates on me. I can't take this anymore. It's not something that happens one day and all of a sudden you're lethargic for stretches. It's something that seeps in at the beginning of the year or last year. It's something generally that don't get me wrong, I'm not sounding off a culture alarm for the New York Rangers. I'm just saying, generally speaking, when teams hit that funk where you go, do these guys really care or not? It's the weight of something emotionally and mentally that's wearing at you for an entire season. And at a certain point, it just hits you, and it hits you collectively because it's probably hitting the leaders of your group, the veteran guys of your group, and that energy just goes out to everyone else. And there's been a lot of storylines about the New York Rangers, not just this season, but last off season as well. And I think that creates some discontent. And I think that gets into your room and it gets into your head. And when times get tough and your body gets tired, when you're emotionally worn out and mentally worn out, maybe you're complaining, maybe you're butting heads at certain times earlier on, I think that all catches up to you. And you see it of a group of guys that I don't need to know the people inside an NHL locker room. And I'll talk about the Rangers as if they were guys of my teammates. Like, these guys are all competitive. They all want to play hard. They all want to show up and do their best. But there's a reason why it looks like they're a lethargic group all at one time. And I think there's just a collective energy that gets into a group, and it's tough to get out of those funks. And you see it all the time with every single team. But sometimes it lasts for 2 games and then you get out of a funk. But sometimes it's just a cloud that hangs over you all year. And on your darkest days, you can't shake it off. And it looks like that's a bit of what's going on in New York. And a lot of it probably has to do with a lot of drama over the last couple of years.
And when the leadership group that you just spoke about on a team disappears and there's nobody there to do what the leaders used to do. And I'm obviously talking about Trouba. What I'm trying to get at is, from what I understand, Trouba was very popular with his teammates. He would have been the captain if they voted for captain, which they don't. Much like Anders Lee, I think with the Islanders, from what I hear, is very popular with his teammates and is a deserving captain, and rightly so. But then, just like if Anders Lee was suddenly, boom, gone on waivers, what would happen to the group?
It'd be a shock. Yeah, you'd have guys going, I think you'd have guys saying, okay, I thought we valued X, Y, and Z, and results are one thing. You're getting it from a guy like Anders Lee, but I thought we valued team first and heart and soul over anything else, and showing up when it's tough, like Trouba did, like Anders does. And all of a sudden that guy gets banished and you go, okay, what are our values a little bit, right? Like, what do we stand for? And I think they made a great move by bringing in JT Miller, because that's a guy that has those same intangibles. He's a warrior. He shows up, he competes, he's tough to play against. Yeah, sure, he can be ornery and be upset, looks like, all the time. But when push comes to shove, like, he's in the fight, he's in the battle. So they replaced a bit of that, what they lost. So I'll credit them for that. But at the same time, yeah, I think it's a shock. You could say the same thing about Goudreau, Barclay Goudreau. I think he had great reputation in that room, and the same thing happened to him. So maybe you just end up wondering, what is it that's valued here?
Rangers come into this road trip starting off in LA, and as Thomas, you had said, continue with the back-to-back on Friday, Saturday at Anaheim and San Jose. They're just a point behind the Canadiens, have played 2 more games, but it just doesn't feel like they're right there. And Neil and I spoke yesterday that the club is going to probably have to go 8-3 in their final 11 just to get to 90 points, which is the cutoff. And that number could actually go up. And from what we have seen, I don't see 8 wins in that club to wrap up the year.
But it's one of those things that, the one thing I've learned, especially now since I've stopped playing, is, the ability of teams to just out of nowhere find a hot streak and start believing in something. It exists. We've seen it with the Islanders. This could be 3 years in a row where they've found a way to do this coming down the stretch. I'm not writing the Rangers off by any stretch. I still think that they could make the playoffs. I think they've got, a chance as strong as the Islanders in Montreal. But for the reasons you're talking about, the direction that it's heading,
yeah.
I mean, that's what makes you go, okay, well, how are they going to pivot and turn into how are they going to get out of this and not only play good, but play great? I mean, that's the hard part, right? When you've got teams like the Islanders on the up and up, it's like, okay, well, they can continue that trajectory. Columbus, well, they lost 6 in a row. How are they going to level that and go up? So I agree with what you're saying, but I think they've got the people in there to do it and the goaltender in there to do it. I wouldn't be shocked, but yeah, they're not in the best position of all those teams that are vying for it.
In the end, it may be simply that the math runs out.
The big thing for them is they've got the tiebreaker, right? So that's the silver lining for them is, and it's going to end that way. Regulation wins. They've got 31, Islanders 25, Montreal 24, Columbus 23. So it's not even close. So, if they just find a way to get that tie, they're going to be in the postseason, and that might be at the end of it when it's all said and done the most important thing for them.
None of this is 100% accurate, and I don't like when people say what I'm going to say, but they got to win 2 out of these 3 to keep in contention, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I think that's totally fair, because it's tough too when you go out west and you've got to come back. I mean, there's a toll that it takes as well. So I know that's not doesn't directly result in points, but at this time of the year, you got to be thinking about that. And when you want to take yourself seriously, 2-1 on a road trip against 2 teams that are outside of the playoff picture and you need it. Yeah, absolutely. 2-1 would be the bare minimum expectation you'd have going out there. But it's so tough because they start in LA. LA's the best home team in the league, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you start playing that mental game. That's why you take it one game at a time.
And a Western trip is sometimes the time when a team can bond together and try to defunct themselves. Do you find that when you're an Eastern team and you get that trip into California?
Yeah, but I do think it's best served in October, November, December. This is sort of too late to be like, okay, let's get to know the new guys. Let's maybe we'll have a day where we'll do a team builder one day and get everyone together. Not at the end of March when playoffs are on the line. That trip is better served at a different time, and you don't get to pick your own schedule. So I do get what you're saying, but not in late March.
Thomas, before we let you go, it is late March, and we're going to flip the calendar briefly to April to get the answer to our trivia question. And you were involved in the scoring of 2 of the 3 overtime goals that were scored by the Isles in the playoffs that year. 2-part question. Who did you score your overtime goal against? And whose did you assist on?
I know the answers. Roberto Luongo in the Panthers was the goal scored. And this would be the tough one for a lot of people.
Yep.
Alan Quine assisted. He was unbelievable that series. Alan Quine and double overtime, I think it was, in Florida.
You are correct.
Wow. It's almost like he's the guy.
Yeah, I mean, I'd feel pretty upset if it's only been, less than 10 years. Yeah, I'd be upset if I let that slip.
It's funny, when I went to look at the goal scorer, and I knew that it was an obscure guy.
Yeah.
And I couldn't remember it. Then, of course, you say, Alan Quine, of course. How could I have not have gotten that. But as it turns out, that's the only playoff goal he ever scored.
Yeah, and he had a glorious chance. I remember in Game 6, in overtime, he had a glorious chance as well to end the series on a 2-on-1. He had a really good look. Yeah, he was great, but that's a great trivia one that I think would stump a ton of people.
And of course, that series was ended by John Tavares later on in that overtime.
And Thomas, talking about memories, I got to throw one at you quickly. You were born in February of 1989, and of course, that was the most famous season in Calgary's history because, of course, they won the Stanley Cup that year that you were not even 1 year old yet. You were just still in diapers when Lanny McDonald won the cup in Calgary. I just want to let you know that I became GM of the New York Rangers in July of 1989, and our first game of my being general manager, our home opener in the 1989-90 season, a season you would remember really well, being turning 1 year old. We played the Calgary Flames at Madison Square Garden, the reigning Stanley Cup champs, and we beat them. And that was, at that point, the highlight of my life, was that I had won my first game as GM, and I had won it against the Stanley Cup champion Calgary Flames. So there you go.
That's pretty cool. I was probably listening on the radio. It wasn't my choice, but maybe I caught a bit of that. You never know.
Well, it's fun to go back, and that's you made me think of that because you said, well, geez, I better remember that. It was only 9 years ago. Now I'm taking you back all the way back to the year you were born and talking about your favorite team, the Calgary Flames. And you weren't even a fan of the Flames yet, and they'd already, when they won the cup. Just think about that.
No, but that's the that's probably why they were still around, and I got to experience it because they got to win back then, right? So it's wild. But yeah, everyone remembers it. It's Flames in the cup, synonymous with 89. So I guess a good year to be born for me.
Yeah, Cliff Fletcher and Terry Crisp. So, Thomas, thanks for being on here with me and Vic and doing this. It's been great, and we really would love it if you'd come on to NHL Wraparound at some point to talk about the entire league and not just about the 3 New York Centric teams.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Thomas and Neil, once again. Terrific show, and we will pick up again on Wednesday with short shifts. So we'll speak with you then. Take care.